Yeah, I mean, I would say that like the projects that I've turned down are probably have grossed more than the projects I've said yes to. I mean, just between Stranger Things and Death Stranding, which is another project that I decided not to work on. Um, a lot of it was just personal, and it had to do with like timing and a fear of pigeonhole.
Thanks for joining us today here on Become a Game Composer. My first experience with your music was FEZ, and then once I started playing Hyperlight Drifter and a bunch of other games, I instantly recognized your distinct sound. And so much so that I made a YouTube video several years ago on a Nord keyboard, and I had watched one of your interviews where you had used Massive and you kind of walked through your process of how you use that in a lot of your music. And I was so transfixed by that ambient sound that I tried to figure out how to do it with hardware. I just thought that was the most interesting thing. So I just want to kick off our chat with a couple questions that I think our audience is going to be really interested in. First of all, how did you find your signature sound? And second is, how do you recommend young composers, let's say age 25, they're just starting off in their career, how do they find their signature sound?
I think I would say it found me. Like I didn't find it. You know what I mean? I would say that what comes out is perhaps like it's an accumulation of little techniques and ideas and things that I've picked up from other people's music that resonated with me. And so I started to build like my own tool bag, basically, of little things. And then that all sort of like started to integrate into my sound. And so as long as I'm being really earnest and like trying to write music that I like, I find that there's going to be some element of me in that. If I'm like super focused on trying to meet some sort of target, like a style or something, and I'm not trying to enjoy, or I'm not trying to like write something that I actually think is really good, it's not going to work for me personally. Like I don't even think I can do it, honestly. I don't think it's possible for me to write something that doesn't sound like me.
That's a very
Like it would take
artistic
a
answer.
lot of
I
extra
love
work
that.
to do that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, here's kind of a follow-up question to that. I think I can ask this now in 2020 because we're several years removed, but Stranger Things. Let's just get this question out of the way. So Stranger Things, I know that you were approached. You were one of the people that was approached to write for that show, and that clearly has been a big success. And I think a lot of people still attribute your sound to be very similar, but I know that you don't love being pigeonholed into like the 80s synthwave style. But you could argue that some of the soundtracks you've done have obviously that ambient sound. So now that we're kind of removed from that, do you feel like declining that project, like where has that led you in your career today? Because I know this is kind of a long question, but like I find that there is great value in saying no. I'm actually agreeing with you that there is a lot of value to say no to stuff because it usually brings something better. So I'm just curious, what do you feel like that led to?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that like the projects that I've turned down are probably have grossed more than the projects I've said yes to. I mean, just between Stranger Things and Death Stranding, which is another project that I decided not to work on. A lot of it was just personal, and it had to do with like timing and a fear of being
Mm.
pigeonholed, or like just sort of the optics of the situation for me personally. Were like, maybe optics is not the right word, but like for me personally, like Stranger Things, that well, I was approached for that like not too long after It Follows, and um, I liked the script for that, but I also it wasn't like something that I was super excited about. Um, and yeah, I asked them to send me a movie that they had worked on, and I didn't super connect with that either. So I just felt like, this is not for me. This is for someone else to do. And also at the time, I had no idea that I was going to be like the biggest TV show ever. It wasn't even called Stranger Things when I got the script. It was called Montauk, and it was set in Long Island. And then like a year later, it's like Super Bowl ads and, billboards. And so I was being like hit over the head with, I was being like constantly reminded of my choice. So, there were times when that was it was a little challenging, but in hindsight, I feel like I made the right choice for me because it opened up, like working on a TV show would have been a massive undertaking. It's so much work, and the timelines are crazy. From a contractual perspective, like you don't really have a lot of flexibility in those situations. And I love flexibility. I love to have a lot of freedom to kind of do my own thing. And so in the time that I didn't do Stranger Things, I went on and did a bunch of other stuff. I got involved with this software company in New Zealand called Dinosaur Polo Club. And we've made two sort of like sim games, Mini Metro and Mini Motorways. And they were like really, really interesting projects for me because I basically did the soundtracks entirely in code. And there have been there have been lots of other things that have come up for me that I've been happy to work on.
That's good, man. I'm glad to hear that you have such a hopeful spirit about it, that you can say no to something and be happy with that choice, because you have to be, because there's no way we can say yes to everything. I just think you gotta learn when to say no. So one of the things that I teach at Become a Game Composer is this idea of exclusivity. And not everyone agrees with this, but I mention you quite a bit in the vein that you are someone that started off with video games and your career has really gone all over the place. And I think it's a positive thing. You've incorporated film and obviously being offered to do a TV series. How do you feel like doing so many different things, different mediums, has affected your career? And do you feel like it's been a positive move to be, I don't want to say accepting of all things, but you know what I mean? Like to do different types of projects.
It has been. I mean, for me personally, like I consider myself a creative explorer. Like I'm not happy. I'm not like content just doing the same thing forever. And so I've always been kind of transient. Like I've moved through different kind of communities and scenes and territories creatively. I was involved with the chiptune scene for a while, the independent game scene more closely than I am now. I just try to go where my intuition is leading me. That doesn't really adhere to sort of the rigid lines of like what this medium or that medium. So I might be working on a game and a film at the same time. I might be working on a software project. I might be doing something with like writing, or like, doing, making speeches, or I'm just like, I've come to understand that I'm, like I have a creative gift and a desire to express myself, and I need to honor that and let it kind of flow freely and not try to control it or like say, this is what I have to do. Repeatedly.
So how do you market yourself or brand yourself now versus 10 years ago when you were really heavily involved with games versus now you're doing a lot of other things? Or is that even a thought? Are you like, whatever comes?
It's kind of, I have a very unique sort of trajectory that not many people have, which is that I would say that I got into the game space at like the best time possible for someone who does what we do. It was right when independent games were getting hot. And so I had been doing it for a handful of years before that. And I'd gone off to music school. I'd done a couple of like cell phone games really randomly. I'd done a couple internships. I'd worked a little bit with a game studio, but it was nothing like earth scorching. And then I worked on FEZ, which turned out to be a really big success. And then I sort of just rode the wave of that as far as opportunities went for a long time. But I also, I was continuously involved in the games community and meeting people and making friends and, finding new things to work on that way. But at this point, you know, it's like marketing myself is less of a priority just because I have really high name recognition for someone who is just a regular person. Because I've worked on like 4 or 5 projects that have reached millions of people. So I'm just in a really fortunate position where I don't have to, like, I still want to engage with my audience, obviously, and so that's something that I think about. But um, I'm more at a place now where I'm not really looking for opportunities to write music. I'm kind of transitioning, actually, more into um, wanting to get more into knowledge sharing. Um, not unlike yourself, because I feel like I know a lot and I have a lot to offer, and I don't always have like crazy motivation to write music at this point.
Yeah. We should talk about that sometime. That'd be a lot of fun just to discuss some of those opportunities. Cause that's a lot of my story is I started off kind of a shotgun approach of trying to do everything. And I got very burnt out because I was always having way too many projects and not very focused. So I ended up kind of swinging the pendulum to decide what do I love the most? And it's been games. And so that has been kind of my career trajectory, but also always teaching people as I go. And that's very rewarding. Um, so what has been the worst game music business advice that you've ever heard or you are currently hearing right now that just makes you cringe and you just want to correct it right now?
I think there are a lot of paths in games. I do think that sometimes people's advice is maybe overly geared towards working on a specific kind of project, or like getting involved in the AAA space or something like that, when there's actually a lot of different paths. So yeah, I don't know. I guess like when advice is super specific, sometimes I'm a little skeptical about it because there's just so many ways to get in. I think the general sort of rule is just that you have to be like open and engaged and like sharing of yourself in order for the world to know that you exist. But yeah, you kind of put me on the spot. I couldn't think of anything specific.
You're fine. You're fine. So in that same idea, you're talking about giving things away. I totally agree with that. That I believe in the law of attraction. I believe that what you put out is what you get back. What you reap is what you sow. So I find that by giving away free music, specifically in exchange for an email address or exchange for a conversation, that kind of thing, by adding value to people, they're much more willing to buy from you or they're much more willing to work with you. So in your experience, what have there been any times in your career where relational equity was the motivation? Like you weren't doing it for the pay, you weren't doing it like you literally just wanted to work with somebody or on a project. Have you noticed any of that in your career?
I guess I've just never thought of it that way. When you said relational equity, I was just like,
Investing in people first.
right.
I feel like you are that way because I think your
Yeah. Yeah.
career it might seem like for me, so I don't know all your personal details of how you got each gig, but from an outside looking in, it might look random, but every project leads to the next.
Yeah.
Every friendship and networking thing, they all connect. So would you say that that's been true?
Yeah, for sure. So like, I can remember in the beginning, like knowing that I really had to put myself out there and kind of stretch my comfort zone as far as like going to events and trying to talk to strangers and that kind of thing. But I also saw people who were trying to do the same thing that I was doing, and they were like really over the top about it, like wearing T-shirts that said "Ask me about video game composing" and stuff like that. And it's just like, oh no, it's like not the way to do it. Um, so I just always was super sensitive to like seeming desperate, um, even though I was super eager to work on stuff. And so I just tried to like put that aside and like just try to get to know people. And I would say I had a very multifaceted approach to like figuring out how to make it, quote unquote, because I was doing all sorts of stuff at the same time, like to sort of figure out to see what would work in getting gigs, but also to see what I liked. I had a remote internship. I had an in-person internship, and I did those at the same time in college. I would go to events. I would do game jams. I played live music. I did live concerts for like 7 years. I released my own albums. I just did a lot of different stuff. I worked at a game studio doing sound design.
So you just mentioned a lot of things. Can you pinpoint any one of those as being maybe more effective than the others? Specifically for getting gigs as a game composer.
The way that I landed the FEZ gig is that I was playing live shows for a couple of years, and I was part of a crew in Boston, a crew that did 8-bit music, and we got invited to play a show in Montreal, and so we went up there and we played, and the developer for FEZ was at the show, and so I met him at the show, and we struck up a conversation, and they were looking for like a compilation score, and I kind of convinced him that he should hire one person, and that kind of worked out in my favor. And then like, so another one of the first like sort of big gigs that I worked on is this game called Shoot Many Robots, which was a studio project, and I got referred for that by the audio director of the MIT Game Lab, which was an internship that I did, and he and also a teacher, like guest teacher at my music school, also put in a reference for me, and I didn't ask them to do that. They just did it. I mean, those were, and so those are two, and then there's a third one, which is that I went to a game developers conference using my student loan money during college, and yeah, and I just I went with the video game music club at my college, which we were fortunate to have. And so we went to all this music stuff. We went to the gang events and stuff like that. And I met, I overheard a conversation people were having about chiptunes, and I just sort of like butted in because I was like, I know a lot about that. And I struck up a conversation with Damian Kasbauer, who's an awesome guy and a veteran he's involved in a lot of stuff. And he just like, he kind of just helped me out. Took my business card and he hired me for a couple of projects while I was still in college.
So what I hear is that there is a common theme in all of these examples. You were doing something that you loved. Basically, you were in the right place at the right time. You could call that luck, but let me rephrase that. I think the world would call that luck, that you were in the right place at the right time, but you really weren't. You were just doing your thing. You were there, and you had the confidence and boldness to enter the conversation, but never once did you try to force anything, but really all those things came to you. And I think so often we try to manufacture a process or a strategy to replicate, but it's not really possible. And I teach a lot of things of how there are strategies, there are things that you can do. And I think you mentioned a bunch of getting internships and putting your music out there. Of course, people have to find you if they want to look up your stuff. And there's certain things that you can do, but I don't think any one of those things creates a career. It's ultimately people make people successful. And I think you're a product of that same result, that other people have believed in you and they took a chance on you. And obviously that has paid off. So I think that's really cool to see that through line there. So thanks for sharing those. What career advice would you give your 25-year-old self? Because you've been through a lot since then.
So in 2011, I was working at a studio in Massachusetts, and I was the audio lead on a project. I was fresh out of college, and I was doing music and sound design and implementation. And I was doing robot sound effects like every single day for almost an entire year. And I was working on FEZ at night.
So it was that same year. Wow.
Yeah.
So that was before the big break, so to speak. Interesting.
Yeah. That was when that was all happening. And after working at that studio for about 9 months, I didn't want to work there anymore. I didn't feel like I was meant to be working at a studio, like that I needed more autonomy, and that I preferred to be a freelancer and just work remotely. So, and I also had another example of me just showing up and doing something kind of, I don't know, like a little weird. So there was a person, so someone on Twitter at one point, he was like, "Hey, I have this friend. It's his birthday. We're gonna throw a big birthday party for him in Silicon Valley, like a joint birthday party, and there's gonna be like sumo suits and like photo booths and like all this crazy stuff." He's like, "Do you want to? We'll fly you out. Do you want to perform at this birthday party?" And I was like, "Okay." And oh no, actually, this was like 2009 maybe. So this was before I moved to California. So just a couple of years. And so it was my first time in California. I went to this party and I met a lot of cool people there, and stayed in touch with a few of them, and still to this day. And so they occasionally would be like, you should move to California. And like 2 years later, um, yeah, the person that I threw the birthday played at the birthday party for is like, "I have a spare room. Like, do you want to move in with me in California?" And I was like, I was kind of in a situation where I wanted to get out of this studio situation, even though like it was a great opportunity and like, everyone there was really nice, but it wasn't for me. I needed to be done with it. So I just left. I moved to California. So my advice to myself at 25, I think I did everything that I needed to do. Like, I don't know. I don't think about things this way. Like, I don't have any regrets. Maybe I would tell myself that my and the way that I feel about things is always going to change. Like, it's not a constant, and so nothing is constant. Like, you're an ever evolving, changing entity, like a human being, and it's easy to kind of, I don't know. Maybe it's easy to think that if things are always going to be the same, and things now are extreme. Like, my relationship to work is super different now than it was 9 years
I can
ago.
tell. I think it's actually really refreshing to see, even just to kind of track, like if we were to do I don't know, an assimilation of 10 different moments throughout your career. I can see that you've changed a lot, but I think it feels like you've matured in a good way. Like you have more of a macro view on life than I'm in the middle of my music and my career. And I'm 30 years old. So I feel like there's something that happens when you're 30. I don't know if it's just the age or what, and I think specifically, I know in my case, I have 4 kids. So that's a monumental difference. I was a completely different person 10 years ago, right? My entire world is different. So it's interesting. I think once you kind of get into your 30s, you start making more long-term plans and you try to think of, I don't know, you kind of question your career for a second. You're thinking, okay, I've been doing something a certain way for a long time. Is this really what I want to do when I'm 50 and 60? And
Yeah,
it's just
totally.
cool to hear how you've kind
I'll
of
tell you.
morphed.
Yeah, I'll tell you that I've been experiencing resistance to my career path for like 5 years at least, and it's just gotten worse and worse as I've taken on harder and harder projects, and so it's
Worse
gotten to
in
the
what
point where
way?
it's really clear to me.
What do you mean worse?
Just like I would say where it's just more frequent that I feel like I don't want to do the work, and that I'd rather be doing something else. In coupling with that, like I've worked on harder and harder projects, and so some of the most like challenging things I've ever done that I'm the most proud of, I've done in the last couple of years. Like I did this orchestral film score, Under the Silver Lake, which was insanely hard. Hyperlight Drifter was insanely hard. So it's like I'm at a place now where it's like I've been doing this for 15 years, and so I start to think maybe I'm like a professional athlete, and I'm coming to the end of my time
Like
on
a
the court.
peak. Yeah.
Yeah, and maybe I need to like switch into something else, because like long term I don't see myself working on films and TV shows and games like all the time. Like I see that I have a lot to offer beyond that, even though that's the thing that externally like the world clamors for the most. So and then there's always that dichotomy that you have to kind of wrestle with. It's like taking control of your own destiny versus like what externally is expected of you.
I like this conversation. We're getting deep here. This is good.
This is just the way I am.
No, I think it's good. It is very refreshing that we're not just talking about what chords do you use on this. That stuff is kind of fleeting and momentary, like you just said. So I want to ask a slightly deeper question, if I may. What do you think is the one irreplaceable part of you? Meaning, it's not necessarily your sound, because other people can sound like you. It's not the fact that you write music, right? So have you ever thought about that before? Like, what is the core thing that is Rich Vreeland? And it may not even be music. What do you think?
I think it's sort of like a holistic perspective that I bring to the work that I do. I think that's part of why I see that I could be fine like outside of just writing, because I feel like there's so much more to it than that. I mean, in the context of writing, I would say that like there is just a cocktail of the aesthetic choices that you make, the compositional choices you make, that if you, I don't know, for me, I just always try to lean into what feels right. So I think that yields the most kind of distinctive results, I would say.
How often have you received reference tracks on games to try to emulate? Is that a common thing for you?
It's more common in film. Like, it's really common in film. In games, it's not that common. But there have been times like on Hyperlight Drifter, there was like one or two tracks that I was struggling on. And so the creative director, Alex, like suggested a reference, and that helped me. And I actually got really comfortable with reference material on when I started working on film. On It Follows, we had a really good temp score, and I was really skeptical about it at first. Like the whole experience of like, I figured there was going to be a lot of issues and temp love, you know, like the director falling in love with the temp score, which did happen. A little
Dude,
bit.
it's inevitable.
But,
It's every time.
yeah. But like having guidelines that I could refer to was actually really helpful. So for me, it was mostly just making sure that I wasn't ripping off this music, and that I was instead being inspired by it to do something different. And so the way that I did that on It Follows was I would listen through to the cue like once or twice, and I would just like internalize the essence of it to the best of my ability. I might like marker a couple of like spots, or like this needs to like have this escalation here or whatever, and then that was it. And then I wouldn't listen to it again, and then I would just write. And on Under the Silver Lake, which was the same team, I had to come up with a somewhat different approach, because that score is so much more complex. There's lots of music under dialogue, and there's a lot of subtlety. So I would listen to that temp score, and I would make a lot more marker notes, like, okay, from this section to this section. And I would just like try to essentialize that, like in kind of an imprecise way, like, you know, like high fluttering sounds, or like escalating, like I'd be a little bit blurry on purpose, just to give myself like a contour that I could follow without being super specific about trying to copy
the
temp score.
flutes come in on a D sharp minor, whatever. Right?
Yeah, no, don't do that.
Don't do that. Oh my goodness. Let's switch gears a little bit. Do you have a favorite failure of yours in your career?
I've really learned the importance of like having a clear understanding of what your relationship is to the person that you're working with. Sometimes it's really good to be like, I love when I'm working with someone who wants me to self-direct and just like do your thing, like we trust you. Like that's awesome. That's kind of rare. Like, but I do appreciate that. And then the flip side is like working with someone who has a really strong vision. And that can manifest in different ways. Like that could be someone who is, steering you more And that might be challenging, but it could also be good. Or someone who's a little bit more open-minded and wants you to bring new ideas to the table. But what I found is that it's really important to know what that dynamic is, because if you're in a situation where you're working with someone who doesn't really express themselves, or like doesn't seem to have clear opinions, I'm just floundering. Like, I don't know what to do, because, when I do something, like, I'm not getting the feedback that they like it or they don't like it. It's like all wishy-washy and confusing. And I've been in situations like that a couple times, and I can't thrive in that situation at all. Like,
were those circumstances that you had to leave the project, or did you just have to kind of have a come to Jesus meeting of, dude, I can't work like this? Like, did you
it was
fix
both.
it, or
it was
what?
like
Okay.
come to Jesus moment, and then I just had to leave because, like, we just weren't seeing eye to eye, and I couldn't get what I needed to be successful. And I found that what I really needed was to have someone who I was in constant contact with and was giving me clear feedback. Even if the clear feedback was like, I don't like this, like I would have to figure out how to interpret their meaning, but at least they had a strong feeling about it. It was a project that, like, took a long, it was, I was involved for a really long time. And so it was unfortunate that it took that long to sort of figure out that, oh, this isn't going to work for this reason. And so now I'm like, I feel like the relationship element of projects is really important to me. It's like really important to understand what the relationship is. And it's almost like dating. It's like, I need to have, I need to be looking for red flags, like, really early in a relationship with someone I'm working with, to make sure that I'm not going to go down some sort of path that it's going to be, not going to end up well.
So how would you filter out to make sure that you don't sign yourself onto a project that's just toxic or a bad experience from the beginning, especially if it's your first time working with somebody?
The way that I know how to do that is to test those, to push those buttons, like, early, to see what's going to happen. Like, not like in a malicious way.
My
just
computer blew up. Deadline's tomorrow. Yeah.
Just to, like, because for me personally, like, I'm very easygoing and, like, kind of laid back, and so there are times when I need to go beyond what I would normally go to be more proactive and, like, asking for things that I need. And so that's part of that process for me. It's like being direct, and, like, like, if like on the first cue or something, like, if I don't feel like I got what I needed, like, to be very direct about it and be like, just going forward, like, it's really important to me that we have a strong relationship, and, like, that we're communicating well, and, like, what do you really think about this cue? Like, can you like elaborate? Can we like develop an ongoing dialogue where we're, like, going back and forth on these things? Because there have been times when the person that was making the decisions was either wishy-washy, or they were like multiple layers removed from me, and I didn't always have access to them. And that's also really challenging. So there's, like, a lot of these sort of hurdles that come up. Maybe not in games, like the multiple tiers of being removed from the person you're working with is not super common in games, but in film it can be, because there's just so many people involved. And so.
Do you believe that the success that you've enjoyed is a result of luck or goal setting?
I did have goals, for sure. I mean, they weren't like, this is a goal and I'm going to do it. It was more like, I want to do this. Like, but so it was like a combination of, there's definitely luck, but I was also showing up. Like, I was doing all these different things, and I was doing what I wanted to do, which is, I mean, sometimes I was pushing myself, but I was pushing myself a lot and stretching my boundaries, doing a lot of socializing and that kind of thing. I'm not an extroverted person, like, so it was a big deal for me when I started playing shows. But I felt like it was something that I had to do. And it was intuitive. It wasn't necessarily like, I'm going to play these shows and then I'm going to get this gig and then all this other stuff is going to happen. Like, I didn't know any of that was going to happen. It was just like, I I was testing myself. I was challenging myself to be more than I was. And I think that was sort of the theme of my 20s.
It sounds like it. So it sounds like most, if not all, at least the examples you gave of the games you got were a result of face-to-face interactions with people
Mhm.
that just from different circumstances. What would you recommend to someone who is very shy? I come across a lot of composers who are shy. They don't want to get behind a camera. They don't want to go to events. And I kind of just say, buckle up and man up and do something about it. But to some degree, some people are just like scared to death of calling someone on
Yeah.
the phone or talking in person, but they want to have a career as a game composer. So what do you suggest to them? Are there any workarounds, or is it really just suck it up and do it?
I mean, if they're really afraid to talk to like a stranger, they should probably go to therapy.
Hmm,
But I do think that there are workarounds. I mean, especially now where everything is kind of remote anyway.
true.
You can do a fair bit of socializing just online through texting or like
Yeah.
uh, written word. And I think written word is probably is a format that, at least for me, like in my experience, it made it easier for me to be more outgoing or a little bit more daring than I would be maybe in like a person to person situation with like what I was
Yeah.
saying and what I was asking for and all that kind of stuff. So that's possible. But I do, like I said, I do think that, um, I think there's value in it for anybody to try to push past some of these fears. I mean, it's just gonna help you in life. I think, like, if I never like made the effort to do those things and to get more comfortable in those situations, like it would have ramifications, I think, for me as a fully grown adult, like in my ability to just interact
Function.
with people. Like I
Yeah.
would be like debilitated. So yeah,
Yeah.
I would say go for it.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier about how you're a very transient person and your life and career has gone a lot of different places. What is one thing that you specifically have changed your mind about in the last few years? Doesn't have to be about music, just in general. Something that you thought perhaps you'd never change your mind on.
Well, I would say my relationship to music, honestly. Yeah, I think it's changed fundamentally since I started. I mean, when I started, I was just so eager to write music and to make stuff and to like put it out there and to see what people thought of it. And I just like continuously driven to um challenge myself in on that trajectory over and over in new ways and to like keep escalating the difficulty curve for myself. And it got to a point where um my my drive and my enthusiasm for it did not match the difficulty setting that I was
Mm,
putting down for myself. And I started to notice that I had been sort of like I had been neglecting other areas of my life in this like blinding pursuit of like being like one of the top composers, like,
mm,
and the opportunities were pushing me in that direction too, but I just started to realize that that's not the life that I want. And I saw peers um who had tons of work but were miserable, and I just, I kind of related to that. And when I saw people who had tons of work who were like loving it, I was like, that's they're supposed to be doing that, but I don't think that's me. Like, I don't think that's what I want.
do you feel like you thrive better when you have one project and that's all you do? That's like the only expectation of you versus here's 10 deadlines and 5 projects and
I think I do better when I have when my yeah when maybe not one project, but just like I think I've gotten to a place where um I've been working on uh other people's projects for a really long time, and sort of living with those deadlines.
true.
And now I'm like a little less interested in that experience and more interested in like making my own deadlines, and starting some of my own projects. And so, yeah, I see myself kind of gravitating away from doing a bunch of scores all the time, and maybe still doing like a little bit of it, like one at a time or something, so that I have more time and space to do other things in my life. Whether it's like, fostering my relationships, or, my hobbies,
Hmm.
or, finding new ways to channel my abilities. Like,
Yeah, I love that. That's actually that's one of my core beliefs, and something I teach here is the more, I guess, the further you get in your career, I believe you should work less, not more. Because at the beginning, we're grinding and we're hustling, and like I used to work 60, 70 hours a week, and I was killing myself. I couldn't foster relationships and marriage hanging on by a thread and that kind of stuff that is just taxes you. It's not sustainable. But progressively, the further along I've gotten, I'm now down to about 15 hours a week, and my goal is actually get to about 4 or 5 hours a week, which sounds kind of insane because I feel like my relationship to music is changing too. It doesn't, I don't know if I still call it a need or not. It's something I enjoy doing, but it's not like I have to have it to breathe, because there used to be days that I couldn't go like a day or two without touching an instrument, like playing a piano or writing music. But now it's sometimes 7 days will go by. I'm like, whoa, I haven't even touched an instrument. What's going on with my world?
yeah, it's funny. I actually found in a journal recently that it was from like 2009 maybe, where I wrote down like, why is it that the thing I love to do the most, right, music, I don't do that much. Like, I'll go, I mean,
Yeah.
like I have a lot of music out there, but I'll go like long periods of time without writing and I'm fine. And I really feel that now, that I can have a great couple of weeks writing no music. And that's like, I don't need to do that. And I think that is definitely been a part of the realization that, like, my relationship to this is changing. It's not what it used to be, or maybe it never was. Maybe it never was that, maybe it was just like, I needed to see like what my relationship to it was. And so I went through all this process, and it's
Yeah.
obvious to me that it's not something that I could just throw away. Like, it's, there's something about it that I need to honor, and that I still enjoy, in a certain capacity. So now it's just been like figuring out what that capacity is. And so like, I'm working on a music software project right now, which has been fun. And, I think a lot about, I'm thinking beyond that, thinking about like, what else am I going to do? Maybe codify some of my knowledge or something. I'm not really sure yet, but I'm still kind of like playing with it.
Yeah. If I could recommend one thing that might be a first step, is to create a course. It's because it's self-contained and it's on one topic, and you can kind of do it on your own schedule, your own time, and you can control what it is, and that kind of stuff might be a cool thing for you. So as we kind of wrap up the conversation here, I want to honor your time. Let's end with a very interesting question. Hopefully they've been different questions you haven't had before, but what is something you believe that other people think is insane?
Turning down insanely great opportunities if they don't feel like the right thing to do, or if the cost is too great. Because I would say that that's the thing that people tell me I'm insane for the most. So that was the first thing that came to mind. Is just like,
Yeah.
My life is on a certain trajectory, and so suddenly I'm getting these like amazing opportunities, but at the end of the day, like, I have to honor what feels right to me. And yeah, so I mean, for someone else who's not in my position, or someone who's like just getting into this, you know um every opportunity seems amazing, but my situation is very different than that situation. And that's how I mean, every opportunity was amazing for me too when I was starting. But then you get to a place where you have a much clearer understanding of your relationship to something. And so for some people, maybe it's onwards and upwards forever, and that's great. But for me, I felt like I had to, I'm getting off the track and I'm getting onto some other track. So.
Well, that's so good to hear, man. Well, thank you, Rich, so much for just having a chat with me today. I know this is going to be extremely valuable, and I appreciate you specifically for being vulnerable and being willing to talk about some of the macro life things of lifestyle, and that we didn't have to get caught in the weeds of what software we use and what DAW we use. And because ultimately it's about your life, and it's about, does game music or any music in that matter, I love that term you use, relationship to music. I'm gonna have to start using that. That's good. And you've posed more questions than answers, and I think that's a good thing. It's gonna make a lot of people.
Yeah.
There's probably gonna be a lot of comments on this video, so maybe you'll pop back in and answer some of those. But I appreciate you,
For sure,
and thanks for your time. So I'll stay in touch and hope you have a good one.